On the day that was supposed to be the
What do you
happiest
mean
of her
he's not
life,
coming?
the bride was mercilessly ridiculed by the groom's family. No one imagined that this seemingly fragile woman carried a secret powerful enough to change everything. With a single phone call, she canceled a $950 million deal, leaving everyone in shock. What truth was she hiding? And how did she transform her destiny in an instant? And before we continue, let me wish you health and peace. Tell me, from which country and at what time are you watching this story? Late winter in Manhattan had a way of making even the grandest avenues feel a little fragile. Along Park Avenue, the last traces of snow clung to the sidewalks, glittering beneath the steady glow of golden street lamps. But tonight, all eyes were fixed on one place, the Whitmore Mansion, a towering estate of glass and stone that shone like a fortress lit from within. Music spilled into the night, violins, a piano, a trumpet weaving together, and beneath it came the rising hum of laughter, the clinking of crystal glasses, the endless chatter of New York's old money. It wasn't just an engagement party. It was a declaration of power. Evelyn Hartwell paused at the gates, her fingers tightening around the small ivory clutch in her hand. She looked down at her dress cream silk, plain compared to the glittering gown she could already glimpse through the windows. No sequins, no jewels, just a soft fabric that clung gently to her frame. Her dark brown hair had been swept back and pinned with a simple silver clip. It wasn't the kind of look the Whitmores had in mind for their future daughter-in-law. She knew that. Still, she drew a breath and lifted her chin, the way her father had once told her when she was a child. Stand tall, even if the world tries to make you small. Inside the mansion, the ballroom looked like something out of a magazine. Crystal chandeliers rained light down on marble floors. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved swiftly with trays of champagne flutes. The Whitmore family crest had been embroidered in gold across long silk banners that draped from the balcony, a reminder that this wasn't just a celebration, it was a performance of heritage. Evelyn stepped in quietly, her heels clicking against the polished stone, and for a moment she thought perhaps she might pass unnoticed. But eyes turned almost immediately, drawn to what didn't glitter, what didn't belong. Lucas Whitmore, tall and handsome in a tuxedo tailored to perfection, stood near the grand staircase, greeting guests with the easy smile of a politician. His dark blonde hair was brushed back, his cufflinks gleamed, and his laughter rang a little too loud. He caught sight of Evelyn, and for an instant, his smile faltered. He didn't walk toward her. He didn't take her hand. Instead, he looked past her, nodding at a senator's wife who had just stepped through the doors. The slight sting of being left to stand alone hit her like a cold breeze, but Evelyn steadied her breath and kept moving. The whispers began almost at once. A woman in a deep emerald gown, her face lifted by one too many surgeries, leaned into a friend. That dress, did she borrow it from a thrift store? Her laugh carried like a chime of broken glass. Another man, heavyset with a Rolex flashing on his wrist, muttered just loudly enough, "Looks like she wandered in from a bus stop." The circle around him chuckled, sipping champagne, as if cruelty was just another form of entertainment. Evelyn kept her posture straight, her gaze forward. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Yet her silence, calm as it was, only seemed to fuel their hunger. Margaret Whitmore, Lucas's mother, chose that moment to sweep across the floor. At 55, she carried herself with the grandeur of a queen who believed her crown eternal. Her gown shimmered green beneath the chandeliers, the train of it trailing like a peacock's tail. She stopped directly in front of Evelyn, her voice pitched perfectly for the nearby guests to overhear. "Sweetheart," she said, her smile sharp as glass. "That dress, it's just not up to our standards. Did you happen to find it secondhand?" Laughter rippled outward in waves. The sting was meant to be public, meant to sting deep. Evelyn's fingers tightened around her clutch, but her face remained calm, her voice absent. She had learned long ago that stillness could be more powerful than any retort. Margaret's smile flickered when Evelyn did not flinch, so she turned deliberately to another guest and continued, "Can you imagine my son with someone so ordinary?" Again, the circle erupted with laughter, the sound echoing off marble like applause at a cruel performance. A cousin in a sleek black gown stepped closer, her pearls catching the light. She tilted her head, her voice dripping false sweetness. "Oh, darling, you must tell us where you shop. I could use a laugh." The group leaned in, expectant. Evelyn set her glass of untouched champagne on a passing tray, her motions slow, deliberate. She turned, her eyes calm, her voice quiet but sharp as a blade hidden in silk. I shop where people don't need to buy their confidence. The cousin's smile froze. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. For a moment, the orchestra seemed to play softer, as though even the violins paused to hear. Evelyn's words lingered. Not loud, but undeniable. And in that pause, before the laughter resumed, something flickered in her gaze. A steady fire, unnoticed by most, but real all the same. The laughter resumed after Evelyn's remark, louder than before, as though they were determined to smother the sting of her words beneath noise. Lucas stood only a few steps away, his smile frozen, his eyes flicking toward her and then quickly away again. He adjusted his cufflinks, the practiced gesture of a man who wanted to seem occupied, as if defending her might inconvenience his image. Evelyn caught the subtle betrayal, but made no sign. She had expected little else. The room's cruelty swelled like a tide. Adrian Cole, the Whitmore's trusted attorney, sauntered over with a glass of scotch in hand. His grin was slick, his tone smooth, but every word landed sharp. "Evelyn, isn't it? If you really loved Lucas, surely you'd bring something to the table. Perhaps a ring with the Hartwell name. Oh wait, that's not worth much, is it?" His chuckle was echoed by a chorus of voices. Evelyn tilted her head, her gaze steady. "You seem very sure of that," she said, her voice soft, unhurried. For the first time, Adrian's smirk faltered. He recovered quickly, but not before a few guests noticed. Nearby, a young man barely out of college, eager to prove himself, held up a salad fork with a smirk. "Hey, Evelyn, do you even know how to use one of these?" The roar of laughter was immediate. Evelyn reached for the nearest fork, twirled it once between her fingers, and set it down with a delicate clink. "I know enough to eat without making a scene." The silence that followed was sudden and heavy. The boy's cheeks flushed crimson, and he looked down, ashamed. Yet the circle of guests, restless for cruelty, filled the void with more whispers and jabs. A woman in a red dress with perfume so heavy it seemed to cloud the air, leaned to her friend, her voice sharp. "Look at her shoes scuffed. She doesn't belong here." Another man, his tie loud and garish, chimed in. "Margaret will have her gone by the wedding." Evelyn's hand brushed the edge of her clutch, fingers pausing as if to ground herself. She didn't look at Lucas, who now laughed with a group of men, his back turned. The betrayal pressed against her ribs like a weight, but her expression did not break. Margaret circled back, her voice laced with false pity. "Dear, you must feel so out of place. Why don't you sit in the corner? Less noticeable." Evelyn lifted her gaze, meeting Margaret's eyes without a tremor. "I'm fine where I am," she said, her words firm though spoken low. The room paused, just for a second, before another wave of laughter tried to bury the moment. From across the hall, an older banker leaned against a pillar, swirling the amber in his glass. "You're brave, girl," he said loudly, drawing glances. "But bravery doesn't buy you a seat at this table. You're out of your league." Evelyn took a step closer, her movement slow and deliberate, just enough to unsettle him. "Funny," she murmured. "I always thought leagues were for people too scared to play the real game." His smirk faltered, and several guests shifted uncomfortably. The air in the ballroom grew tense, as if a storm were gathering beneath the glitter and music. For a fleeting moment, Evelyn remembered her father. Years ago, she had sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor of his office, tracing the edge of a leather-bound book. His voice had been steady, his hand on her shoulder. "You don't need to shout, Bella. You don't need to prove anything. Just be." The memory flickered like a candle, gone as quickly as it came, leaving her with the echo of his calm. The music swelled again, violins soaring, but the air felt heavier, crowded with judgment. Guests whispered behind gloved hands, snapping photos when they thought she wouldn't notice. Margaret raised her glass, her voice cutting through the noise. "To my son's future," she declared, "and to a bride who will learn her place." Applause followed, though not all clapped with ease. Evelyn stood perfectly still, her hands clasped, her face unreadable. Somewhere near the back, a nervous waiter stumbled slightly, his tray of drinks wobbling dangerously. A fur-draped guest sneered, "Careful, boy. Don't ruin her dress. It's probably the best thing she owns." The crowd chuckled. Evelyn reached out, steadying the tray with a gentle hand. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "It's not the dress that matters. It's the person wearing it." The waiter's eyes filled with gratitude as he hurried away. But the woman in furs only scoffed, turning back to her friends. Still, Evelyn did not bend. She scanned the room slowly, deliberately, her eyes memorizing each face, each sneer. She knew this night was not the end of the story. Something inside her, calm yet unshakable, told her that storms could be endured, and when the silence finally came, she would decide what remained standing. And though no one noticed, though laughter and cruelty seemed to fill every corner of the ballroom, Evelyn's gaze held steady fire. She was waiting, not defeated, but patient, waiting for the moment when truth would break through the glittering cruelty, like sunlight through stained glass. The morning after the engagement party, Manhattan wore a thin veil of fog. The streets glistened from an overnight drizzle, and cabs honked impatiently as they slid down Fifth Avenue. In a quiet corner booth of a small cafe near Bryant Park, Evelyn sat with a steaming cup of black coffee, untouched, her gaze fixed on the window. The city moved around, her strangers rushing with umbrellas. A street saxophonist playing softly at the corner, but inside, she felt cocooned in silence. The humiliation of the night before replayed in her mind like a loop she couldn't shut off. Margaret's cutting words, the laughter of strangers, Lucas standing just feet away, yet saying nothing. She had held her posture, her dignity, but dignity was a lonely shield. Evelyn pressed her fingers around the warm ceramic of her cup, trying to steady the tremor in her chest. She wasn't angry, not yet. Just hollow, as though the crowd had scraped pieces of her away. Her phone buzzed once on the table. A message from Lucas. Last night got out of hand. Mother didn't mean it. Don't take it personally. Evelyn stared at the words, the cold dismissal wrapped in polite apology. She didn't respond. Instead, she closed the phone and slipped it back into her bag. The silence was answer enough. Outside, the fog lifted slightly, revealing the bare branches of the park trees. Evelyn thought of her father again, his voice telling her to stand tall, his belief that storms eventually passed. But this storm wasn't passing, it was circling. And she knew, somewhere deep inside, that Lucas wasn't going to shield her from it. Later that afternoon, she walked into the Whitmore office tower on Madison Avenue, a sleek glass building that reflected the gray sky. Inside, the lobby gleamed with marble and brass, the kind of place designed to remind visitors of power before they even reached the elevators. Evelyn had promised Lucas she'd stop by. He had insisted they smooth things over with the family. Her stomach tightened as she stepped into the elevator, watching the numbers climb. On the 32nd floor, the Whitmore boardroom stretched like a stage. Margaret was already there. Seated at the head of the long mahogany table, her emerald nails tapping against a crystal glass of water. Beside her sat Adrian Cole, papers neatly stacked, his smirk already forming. Lucas was at the far end, flipping through documents with the distracted air of a man who wanted to be anywhere else. Evelyn, Margaret greeted, her tone sugary, her smile anything but. I trust you've had time to reflect on last night. Evelyn met her gaze calmly, choosing not to answer. Margaret continued. The Whitmore family values strength, presentation, legacy. We cannot afford weakness or mediocrity. Adrian leaned forward, his pen tapping the papers. Contracts worth nearly $1 billion ride on this marriage, he said, pretending it was casual. If you truly care for Lucas, you'll make sure nothing jeopardizes that. Evelyn caught the words beneath his meaning. You are a liability. Lucas finally looked up, offering a weak smile. Mother's just worried, Evelyn. Don't let her words get to you. His tone was light, but his eyes begged her not to make trouble. Evelyn felt the distance between them stretch wider with every syllable. The meeting dragged on, filled with subtle digs, the word ordinary thrown more than once. Evelyn stayed silent, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her breathing steady. They wanted her silence, they expected it. But silence, she knew, was not surrender. When it was over, Margaret rose gracefully, her perfume filling the room. Do consider investing in something more suitable for the wedding, she said softly, brushing past Evelyn as though she were a shadow. Adrian chuckled under his breath. Lucas avoided her eyes. Evelyn walked out of the tower, the sharp winter air hitting her cheeks like a slap. She crossed Madison Avenue without looking back. The city was loud horns, chatter, the rumble of the subway beneath her feet, but inside, her storm was silent. Not rage, not despair. Something colder, steadier, beginning to take shape. That evening, Evelyn returned to her apartment on the Upper West Side, a modest space compared to the Whitmore estate, but warm in a way their mansion never was. The walls carried the scent of old oak from the bookcases, the faint echo of her father's life still lingering in the photographs she kept on the mantel. She loosened her coat and dropped her clutch on the table, the sound small, yet final, like a period at the end of a sentence. She poured herself a glass of water and sat near the window, the city lights twinkling below. The voices from last night blended with those from the boardroom, overlapping in cruel harmony. She doesn't belong. She's ordinary. Out of her league, Evelyn traced her finger along the rim of the glass, listening to the quiet hum. The loneliness pressed against her ribs, but she didn't break. Instead, she leaned back and let the stillness wash over her. The phone buzzed again Lucas's name. She let it ring, the sound filling the apartment before fading into silence. A voicemail arrived, seconds later. His voice was strained, hurried. "I need you to understand, Evelyn. My family, they're under pressure. The deal is important. Just let it pass, all right? We'll get through this." He didn't say I'm sorry. He didn't say I'll stand by you. Only let it pass. Evelyn set the phone face down. In the silence that followed, she realized something with startling clarity. Lucas was not her storm shelter. He was part of the storm. The next day, she forced herself to attend a charity brunch Margaret had arranged at the Plaza Hotel. The ballroom was drenched in golden light, tables lined with orchids and silver cutlery. Women in fur-trimmed coats whispered in clusters, while men in dark suits spoke loudly of stocks and influence. Evelyn moved quietly among them, smiling politely when addressed, though most hardly acknowledged her. At one table, a socialite with diamonds glittering at her throat leaned close, her voice syrupy but sharp. "My dear, you must feel so lucky. Most girls could never dream of landing a Whitmore." The women around her laughed, the sound practiced, brittle. Evelyn simply smiled, the kind that neither agreed nor denied. Her silence unsettled them more than a retort could have. As she stepped aside to the balcony, the cold air greeted her like a friend. Central Park stretched below, bare trees clawing at the gray sky. For a brief moment, she felt a pang of homesickness, not for a place, but for a time when kindness outweighed cruelty, when her father's voice was enough to steady her heart. She pressed her palms against the railing, letting the wind numb her skin. Inside, the laughter continued. Champagne glasses clinked, and Margaret's voice rose above them all. Evelyn turned back, her eyes scanning the glittering crowd. She saw the smug smiles, the careless cruelty, the empty performances of wealth, and she knew, with a certainty as sharp as glass, that she did not belong here not because she was less, but because she was more than this shallow theater. She walked back through the ballroom, her steps calm, deliberate. A waiter passed, and she set her untouched champagne flute on his tray. Margaret's eyes followed her across the room, narrowing, calculating. Lucas lifted his head, his mouth parting, as if to call her back. But no words came. Evelyn slipped past the gilded doors and into the crisp air outside. The city met her with the rush of cabs, the glow of neon, the pulse of life that belonged to no family crest. She drew her coat tighter, her breath visible in the cold. The storm inside her no longer felt empty. It had shape now, edges sharp enough to cut. She didn't yet know what she would do, but she knew one truth with absolute clarity. She would not bow her head again. And as she walked down Fifth Avenue, her heels striking the pavement in steady rhythm, Evelyn felt the storm grow quiet, not gone, but contained, waiting. A silent storm, gathering strength for the day it would break. The Whitmore offices rose like a glass monolith above Madison Avenue, its mirrored surface catching the pale winter Sunday. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with urgency assistants scurrying with folders, phones ringing, executives speaking in clipped tones. Evelyn walked through the lobby with measured steps, her cream coat draped neatly across her arm, her presence a quiet contrast to the chaos around her. She had been summoned, though not in so many words. Lucas had asked her to stop by after a board meeting. It was phrased as casual, but Evelyn had learned that nothing in the Whitmore world was casual. Every invitation was a test, every glance a calculation. On the 40th floor, the boardroom door stood ajar. Evelyn paused before entering, catching a fragment of conversation. Margaret's voice, smooth yet sharp as ice. "She lacks polish, Lucas. Our reputation is not a toy for you to gamble with." Another voice, Adrian, smug and certain. "Investors are already whispering. A woman like that at your side signals weakness." Lucas's reply came softer, strained. "She's different. She's not like the rest of them." But there was no conviction in his tone. The words floated, weak, as though even he did not believe them. Evelyn stepped inside before they could continue. The room shifted. Margaret straightened in her chair, her green eyes gleaming with disdain barely veiled. Adrian smirked, tapping his pen against the polished wood table. Lucas rose quickly, as if eager to pretend control. "Evelyn, you made it," he said, his smile practiced. He gestured toward a seat at his side, though the chair felt less like welcome and more like containment. The meeting resumed, numbers and contracts projected on a massive screen. Evelyn listened, silent, as the conversation twisted around billion-dollar deals and shareholder approval. Yet beneath it all, she could feel the undercurrent directed at her, the pointed remarks about legacy, the careful phrasing about public image. Each word was a dart cloaked in business language. When the meeting ended, Margaret dismissed the board with a graceful flick of her hand. One by one, the executives filed out, leaving Evelyn, Lucas, Margaret, and Adrian. The silence pressed heavy, until Margaret broke it. "Evelyn," she said, her voice low, deliberate, "our family has carried this name for generations. We have fought for it, bled for it, protected it. And you think you can walk in with your plain dresses and silent smiles and be one of us?" Evelyn met her gaze, calm but unyielding. "I don't think I need to be one of you. I only need to be myself." Adrian laughed, sharp and hollow. "And what is that worth? A Hartwell name? A faded inheritance? Investors don't invest in ordinary." His smirk widened, certain he had delivered the final blow. Lucas stepped forward, placing a hand on Evelyn's arm. "Please," he said softly, "don't make this harder." His voice cracked, but not with defiance, only with the weight of convenience. He wanted peace, not justice. Evelyn looked at his hand, then at his face, searching for a man who would stand with her. But all she found was a boy too afraid to confront his own shadow. She pulled her arm free, her motion quiet but firm. "You want me silent," she said, her words barely above a whisper. "But silence doesn't change the truth." The air stilled. Margaret's expression hardened. Adrian leaned back, smug. Lucas looked away. Evelyn turned and left the boardroom without another word. Her heels clicked against the marble hallway, each step louder than the last, until even the elevator's closing doors couldn't smother the echo. Down on the street, the city greeted her with horns and wind. She stepped into the flow of people, anonymous yet strangely free. The Whitmores had wanted her silence, but they had not noticed what her silence contained. A choice, building quietly, waiting for the moment to be spoken. That night, Lucas showed up at Evelyn's apartment unannounced. The knock came just as she was settling into the quiet, a pot of tea steaming on the counter, a record playing low in the background. When she opened the door, he stood there in his tailored coat, his hair still slick from the office, his smile thin and tired. "Can I come in?" he asked. Evelyn hesitated before stepping aside. He entered, looking around as though the small apartment might collapse under his gaze. The books stacked by the window, the framed photo of Evelyn with her father, the worn rug, none of it fit the world he came from. Lucas sat down on the edge of the sofa, his hands clasped, his posture uneasy. "About today," he began, his voice carefully measured. "My mother, Adrian, they can be harsh, but they mean well. They just want what's best for the family." Evelyn poured herself tea, setting the second cup down in front of him, though he didn't touch it. "What about what's best for us?" she asked quietly. He exhaled, his gaze slipping to the floor. "It's complicated." The word hung between them, heavier than any insult she had heard at the party or in the boardroom. Complicated was a shield, an excuse, a way of saying, "I will not choose you over them." Evelyn sat across from him, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Lucas," she said softly, "when they insult me, they insult you too. They treat me as if I'm less, and you let them." He looked up then, his face pale. "I'm trying, Evelyn. I'm trying to balance everything. The deal, the family, you. Her heart ached at the word balance. She didn't want to be balanced against contracts or reputations. She wanted to be chosen. But she saw, clearly now, that Lucas wasn't the man to choose her. He was the man who would always weigh her against a ledger. The silence stretched until Lucas stood abruptly. "I should go," he said, his voice strained. "We'll talk more tomorrow." When the door closed behind him, Evelyn leaned back against the wall, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. The city hummed outside, the low rumble of traffic mixing with the faint whistle of the wind. She felt the loneliness deepen, but beneath it, something steadier began to take root. A quiet strength, hardening like stone beneath the surface. Days later, the cracks widened. Evelyn joined Lucas at a gala downtown, another glittering event filled with flashing cameras and champagne towers. The whispers started almost immediately. A socialite snapped a photo of her dress, posting it with a cruel caption. A hedge fund manager chuckled to his wife that Lucas had settled down with a charity case. And through it all, Lucas smiled, laughed, and clinked glasses, pretending not to hear. At one point, Evelyn excused herself and slipped onto a balcony overlooking the city. The air was cold, sharp, carrying the smell of roasted chestnuts from a vendor below. She wrapped her arms around herself, staring at the skyline. Behind her, the glass doors reflected the ballroom, the glittering crowd. She saw Lucas inside, his arm draped around a colleague's shoulder, his face lit with practiced charm. Her reflection stood apart, alone in the dark. And for the first time, Evelyn felt no shame in that solitude. She realized that cracks had already formed in the glass world she had been pulled into. And once cracks appear, they only spread. She touched the silver clip in her hair, the one piece of her father she always carried. In that moment, she knew the silence would not last forever. One day soon, the storm would break. The Plaza Hotel glittered like a jewel on Fifth Avenue, its grand facade wrapped in white roses and silk banners. Inside, the ballroom had been transformed into a vision of opulence. Chandeliers ablaze, an aisle lined with golden chairs, a string quartet filling the air with music that trembled on the edge of reverence. Guests poured in, their gowns and tuxedos flashing like mirrors, their whispers rising in eager anticipation. The Whitmores had spared no expense. This was meant to be remembered. Evelyn stood at the far end of the aisle, her gown simple but elegant ivory silk that fell smoothly to the floor. No veil, no jewels, just the quiet dignity of a woman who carried herself without armor. She felt the eyes of hundreds upon her, measuring, judging, waiting for her to falter. She inhaled slowly, steadying herself with the memory of her father's words. Just be. Margaret Whitmore sat in the front row, her emerald gown catching every shard of light, her chin lifted in triumph. Adrian Cole lingered at her side, leaning back with the confidence of a man who believed he had already won. Lucas stood at the altar, his smile strained, his eyes darting from his mother to the crowd, avoiding Evelyn's gaze. The ceremony began, the priest's voice rising steady and calm. Yet it was interrupted almost immediately. Margaret rose, her voice sharp enough to cut through the music. "Before my son agrees," she declared, "perhaps the bride can tell us what wealth her family brings. What exactly does she have to offer?" Gasps rippled through the crowd, heads turned. A woman in a feathered hat laughed. "Yes, tell us, dear. What dowry does she carry?" Another voice chimed in, cruel and loud. "Nothing. She's not fit for this house." Laughter erupted, and the sound of cameras clicking filled the room as guests began to capture the spectacle. Evelyn stood motionless, her hands clasped before her. An influencer near the back raised her phone, her voice carrying. "This will go viral." Caption: "Thrift store bride at a king's wedding." The crowd laughed harder, some clapping at the cruelty. Lucas shifted uncomfortably, his face paling. He opened his mouth, as if to object, but then shut it, his jaw tight. His silence was louder than words. Evelyn's gaze found the influencer. "Make sure you get my good side," she said evenly. The laughter faltered, uncertain. Her voice, calm and steady, seemed to ripple outward, disturbing the polished surface of the room. The priest tried to resume, but Margaret lifted her glass, her voice triumphant. "This marriage would be a stain on our name." Guests nodded, murmuring agreement, their voices layering over one another. She's a nobody. Someone hissed. Lucas deserves better. Evelyn's eyes grew cold, steady as steel. She did not flinch, did not cry. Her silence carried more weight than their mockery. But then Lucas turned toward her, his voice low, yet audible enough for those nearby.
Mother, maybe you're right.
The words struck like a blade. Evelyn's fingers curled into her palms, the betrayal piercing deeper than any insult. Around them, laughter spread, vicious and gleeful. A man in a bow tie leaned toward his wife, smirking. She's never even been in a boardroom. Probably thinks a merger is something you order at a diner. Evelyn turned her head slightly, her eyes locking onto him. Her voice was quiet but sharp. I know a bad deal when I see one. The man's smirk faltered, his laugh dying in his throat. Yet the crowd pressed on, emboldened by numbers, unwilling to see what trembled beneath Evelyn's calm. She stepped forward then, her heels tapping softly against the polished floor. The priest looked startled as Evelyn reached for the microphone. She held it gently, her posture straight, her gaze sweeping the room. Her voice, when it came, was calm but resonant, like the final note of a hymn. Thank you, she said, for showing me your true faces. This wedding ends here. The ballroom erupted. Gasps, shouts, whispers surged through the crowd. Lucas's face flushed crimson. How dare you insult me in front of everyone, he shouted, stepping toward her. Evelyn's eyes did not waver. I'm not running away, she said, her voice cold as glass. I'm canceling it. For a breathless moment, the crowd believed she had lost her mind. Laughter broke out again, sharp and cruel, as though they were watching an actress miss her cue. She's insane, one man muttered. She just tossed away her golden ticket, another sneered. Phones rose higher, recording her every move like vultures circling overhead. Margaret stepped forward, her voice dripping venom. No house, no fortune. You think leaving us means anything? Adrian's grin widened, his words biting. Without this family, without us, she has no future. Lucas joined in, his voice bitter. Without me, you're nothing. Their words stacked atop one another, a tower of cruelty they believed unshakable. Evelyn's fingers slipped into her clutch. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. Her thumb hovered over her phone, calm and steady. She raised her gaze, her eyes sharp as glass. A woman in a glittering gown lifted her wineglass mockingly to the girl who thought she could play in our world and lost. The crowd cheered, their jeers swelling like a storm. And then Evelyn pressed the screen. Behind her, the giant projection flickered to life. Bold, unmistakable words appeared. Torres Global Tech terminates $950 million contract with Whitmore Group due to fraud and disrespect. The ballroom froze. Laughter cut short, gasps ringing out like glass shattering. Adrian's face drained of color. Margaret's jeweled hand flew to her chest, her rings trembling. Lucas staggered back, his mouth open, his eyes wide with disbelief. The guests shifted uneasily, phones buzzing as news alerts spread like wildfire. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice unshaken. I don't need this family, she said clearly. I am Evelyn Hartwell, the CEO you mocked. The revelation struck like a hammer. Panic rippled through the room. A senator's wife whispered furiously into her phone. Investors slipped out quietly, their faces pale. On the screen, headlines updated in real time. Whitmore Empire collapses. Bride revealed as CEO. Power shifts overnight. Margaret fell to her knees, her voice shaking. Forgive us, Evelyn. We can restore this. We can renegotiate. Adrian wiped the sweat from his brow, stammering promises. Lucas stumbled forward, desperation raw in his eyes. I'm sorry. I still love you. Stay. We can fix this. Ugh. Evelyn looked at him, her face calm, distant. She gently pulled her hand from his grasp. She didn't need to say a word, her silence was answer enough. The crowd, sensing the empire's collapse, began to scatter. Phones buzzed with collapsing stock prices, whispers of rival companies swooping in. The Whitmore's world was crumbling in real time, and Evelyn stood at the center, not triumphant, not vengeful, but steady. From the back, a defiant investor shouted, his voice shaky. "You think you can just ruin us and walk away? You'll regret this." Evelyn paused at the edge of the altar, her profile catching the light. "Regrets," she said softly, "are for people who make bad choices." The man sat down, pale, silent. As chaos consumed the room, Evelyn walked down the aisle, her steps unhurried, her clutch tucked firmly under her arm. She had not raised her voice. She had not begged. She had simply revealed the truth. And in that truth, the Whitmores shattered. Outside, the city lights burned brighter than chandeliers. Snowflakes drifted slowly from the night sky, melting on her skin as she stepped into the waiting car. Behind her, the echoes of wealth and cruelty collapsed into nothing. Ahead of her, the road stretched open, waiting for what came next. The morning after the wedding that never was, New York City awoke to headlines blazing across every screen. Whitmore Group stock crashes. Bride turns out to be CEO. $950 million deal terminated. The newspapers stacked outside Corner Dulles carried Evelyn's photo, her calm face at the altar. The words, "This wedding ends here," quoted like scripture. Inside the Whitmore mansion, silence replaced the usual hum of servants and clinking glasses. Margaret sat in the grand parlor, her emerald gown abandoned across a chair, her face stripped of makeup, pale and drawn. The phones rang endlessly, but she didn't answer. She simply stared at the cold fireplace, her empire unraveling around her. Adrian Cole paced furiously in the study, his tie loosened, his smirk gone. He barked into his phone. "We can salvage this. We just need—" But each call ended the same. Investors pulled out. Partners declined. His name, once whispered with respect, now trailed scandal. The man who had mocked Evelyn was now drowning in consequences. Lucas shut himself in his room upstairs. Blinds drawn against the morning light. Empty champagne bottles littered the floor, remnants of a celebration turned graveyard. He scrolled through endless articles, each one showing his face beside Evelyn's. The captions stung. Groom abandoned. Empire shattered. He tossed the phone aside, but the weight of shame clung to him like smoke. Meanwhile, Evelyn sat quietly in her apartment, sipping coffee at her small kitchen table. The city outside moved as always, taxis honking, children rushing to school, the hum of life indifferent to scandal. She opened her laptop, scanning through reports from her own company. Torres Global Tech was stable, thriving. The deal with Whitmore was terminated, yes, but already her team was in talks with a rival firm. Evelyn's silence had been enough to undo a dynasty. But she didn't smile. She didn't gloat. Her gaze lingered on a framed photo of her father, his kind eyes steady. She whispered softly, "I didn't let them break me." It wasn't victory she felt, but clarity. The Whitmores had built castles of glass, fragile and vain. All it had taken was truth to make them crack. Out in the city, whispers spread through social circles. The woman in the red dress who had mocked Evelyn lost her sponsorship with a luxury brand after her comments went viral. Margaret's invitations to galas dried up overnight. The glittering doors that had once opened at her name now closed silently. Adrian's law firm terminated his partnership, unwilling to carry the stain. Lucas's face became the subject of gossip pages, his charm reduced to a footnote beneath Evelyn's name. Yet for Evelyn, life remained steady, almost ordinary. She still walked to the corner cafe for her morning coffee, still tipped the waiter who remembered her order, still watched the city lights from her window at night. The storm outside raged, but inside, she carried calm. She had not won power, she had simply refused to surrender her dignity. And in doing so, she had revealed the emptiness of those who had tried to strip it from her. In the days that followed, the Whitmore name, unraveled like thread, pulled loose from an old coat. Once proud investors scrambled to distance themselves. Rivals circled with sharp smiles, and whispers of bankruptcy echoed through Wall Street. The family that had stood untouchable now found itself at the mercy of headlines and rumors. Margaret tried desperately to regain footing. She arrived uninvited at luncheons, only to find chairs mysteriously full. She dialed old allies, but their voices were suddenly cold. One evening, she sat alone in her limousine parked outside the Metropolitan Opera, watching other women glide up the red-carpeted steps while no one waved her over. The bitterness in her chest tasted like iron. She clutched her emerald necklace as though it could still anchor her, but even jewels had lost their weight. Adrian Cole fared no better. His sharp tongue had become a liability, his arrogance replayed in viral clips of the wedding where he sneered at Evelyn. Clients withdrew their cases, his office door closed permanently. He left the Whitmore estate in shame, his briefcase lighter than his regrets. And Lucas, he drifted through Manhattan like a ghost. Friends avoided him. Even those who once admired his charm now mocked his weakness. One night, he wandered into a quiet bar on the Lower East Side, slumping over a glass of whiskey. The bartender, unaware of who he was, asked gently, "Rough night?" Lucas almost laughed, almost cried, but managed only a nod. The man who had once been surrounded by applause now sat alone, hearing nothing but the echo of Evelyn's final words. This wedding ends here. Across the city, Evelyn chose a different rhythm. She walked through Central Park one chilly morning, the bare branches stretching overhead like dark veins against the sky. Families strolled with children bundled in coats. Couples shared quiet laughter, and an old man played chess on a stone table. Evelyn paused, watching the pieces move, listening to the simple joy of life unfolding. She felt a pang not for the Whitmores, not for their ruined empire, but for the years she had wasted trying to fit into their brittle world. That evening, she sat by her window with a worn photo in hand, herself as a child, sitting on her father's lap, his hand guiding hers across a page of notes. His voice echoed in memory. "It's not about proving yourself, Bella. It's about being true." She whispered softly into the quiet apartment. "I tried, Dad. I stayed true." Her phone buzzed once more. It was Lucas. She didn't answer. The voicemail arrived anyway, his voice thick, trembling. "Evelyn, please. I made a mistake. I see it now. She deleted it before it ended. Some storms weren't worth weathering. Instead, she opened her laptop, reviewing a proposal from Harper Dynamics, a company run by Jonathan Pierce, a name she remembered from years ago, a man who had once spoken to her with respect, not mockery. The document was clean, professional, promising a partnership built on trust rather than arrogance. Evelyn's eyes lingered on the words, not yet ready to decide, but willing to consider. The Whitmore's empire lay in ruins, their glass walls shattered beyond repair. And Evelyn? She sat quietly, a cup of tea warming her hands, the city humming outside her window. She hadn't sought revenge, hadn't planned destruction. She had simply stood tall, and the truth had done the rest. And though the storm still swirled around her, Evelyn felt, for the first time in months, that her silence was not a shield anymore. It was strength. A week after the wedding fiasco, Evelyn thought she had finally found calm. Work consumed her days. Quiet walks in Central Park soothed her evenings, and the clamor of the Whitmore scandal began to fade into background noise. But one crisp Saturday morning, as she sorted through a box of old family papers her mother had mailed from Boston, something caught her eye. It was a faded envelope, brittle with time, addressed to her late father. The handwriting, elegant, deliberate, was not her mother's. Evelyn hesitated, her fingers trembling as she slid the letter out. The ink had browned, but the words were clear. "I trust you will raise her well, even if the truth cannot be spoken. She must never know who her real father is." Her breath hitched. The page slipped from her grasp and fluttered to the hardwood floor. She sat frozen, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly deafening. Her real father? For 33 years, Evelyn had carried her father's last name like armor, believing herself the child of his blood and love. Could it be that everything she knew about herself was not what it seemed? She called her mother immediately. After several rings, a weary voice answered.
"Evelyn, it's early. What's wrong?"
"Mom," Evelyn whispered, clutching the letter. "I found something. A letter. It says Dad wasn't my real father. Tell me it's not true." Silence stretched long over the line. Finally, her mother sighed, the sound heavy with years of secrets.
"Evelyn, I was going to tell you, but I thought I could protect you from it forever."
"Protect me?" Evelyn's voice cracked.
"From what?
"Who is my father?" Her mother hesitated, then spoke the name Evelyn least expected. Arthur Whitmore. The world tilted. Evelyn gripped the edge of her table, the city skyline outside blurring. Arthur Whitmore, the very patriarch who had mocked her, The man whose family had ridiculed her at the altar. The man she had thought of only as an enemy was her blood. "Why didn't you tell me?" Evelyn's voice trembled with both fury and sorrow. "Because he chose silence," her mother said softly. "Because when I told him about you, he turned away. Your father, the man who raised you, he loved you as his own. I didn't want you to grow up with the weight of rejection. But Arthur knew, Evelyn. He always knew." Tears blurred her vision. Evelyn's heart pounded as fragments of memory crashed together. Arthur's fleeting glances during meetings, his strange hesitation the few times they had spoken. Had there always been something beneath his stern exterior? The revelation cracked open a chasm inside her. Everything she had believed about the Whitmores shifted. They were not just her adversaries, they were her kin. The ridicule, the mockery, the deal, the betrayal family had done this to her without knowing, or worse, perhaps knowing all along. As the truth settled like lead in her chest, Evelyn realized the scandal was no longer just about power or pride. It was about blood, about betrayal buried deep, about a family she never asked for but could not escape. And somewhere in the shadowed halls of the Whitmore estate, Arthur himself sat in his study, staring at an empty glass of scotch, haunted by the memory of a woman he had once loved and the child he had never claimed. That evening, Evelyn found herself standing once again outside the Whitmore mansion. The stone facade loomed tall, its windows glowing faintly in the dusk, though the house itself felt quieter than she had ever known it. For a long time she hesitated at the gate, letter in hand, torn between anger and the aching need for answers. Finally, she pressed the buzzer. The butler who opened the door looked startled to see her. "Miss Hartwell," he began, but she cut him off gently. "Tell Arthur Whitmore his daughter is here," she said, her voice steady, though her heart thundered in her chest. Minutes later, she stood in the study where Arthur often held court, surrounded by shelves of leather-bound books and oil portraits of long-dead ancestors. He looked older than she remembered, his broad shoulders hunched, silver hair thinning at the crown. He didn't rise when she entered, perhaps out of pride, perhaps out of shame. Evelyn placed the faded letter on his desk. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice breaking the silence. Arthur's eyes lingered on the paper, then lifted to hers. His gaze was heavy, filled with regret that had no place to hide. "Yes." The single word pierced her deeper than any insult ever had. "You knew," she whispered. "All these years while your family mocked me, while they tried to humiliate me, you knew." Arthur swallowed hard. "I knew. And I was a coward. I told myself I was protecting you by staying away, that you'd be better off without the stain of my name." "Better off?" Her voice rose, trembling with both rage and grief. "You watched me walk into that house, into that family, and let them tear me apart. You sat silent, while your own blood was humiliated." He leaned back, his hands trembling slightly on the armrests. "I thought distance would spare you, but watching you at that altar, Evelyn, I saw the strength I never had. You are more Whitmore than anyone in this house, because you carry dignity, not pride." Evelyn's chest heaved as she fought the storm inside her. She had imagined this moment so many times in the hours since reading the letter, screaming at him, turning her back forever. But standing there, seeing him broken and stripped of the authority he once wielded, she felt something else. A painful tug of kinship, the stubborn thread of family that refused to snap even after decades of silence. She shook her head. "You don't get to ask for forgiveness. Not tonight. Maybe not ever." Arthur bowed his head. "I know." His voice was barely more than a whisper. "But if nothing else, know this. I am proud of you, even if I never earned the right to say it." Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall in front of him. She turned toward the door, gripping the handle. Before leaving, she spoke without looking back. "The Whitmore name may have built this mansion, but it has no claim on me. My strength comes from the man who raised me, the father who chose me every single day." Ugh. The door closed behind her with a finality that echoed down the silent hallways. Arthur sat alone in the study, staring at the letter that had betrayed his secret. His empire was gone, his family fractured, and now the daughter he had never claimed stood before him like a mirror of all his failures. For the first time in years, his eyes burned with tears. Outside, Evelyn stepped into the cold Manhattan night. The city roared around her, taxis honking, people hurrying past, but she felt suspended in a quiet bubble, her mind whirling with pain and clarity. Blood had bound her to the Whitmores, but love had shaped her. And that truth, sharper than any scandal, gave her strength. The first snow of December drifted over Manhattan, dusting rooftops and blanketing Central Park in pale silence. Evelyn sat by the window of her apartment, cradling a mug of hot cocoa, watching children laugh as they built lopsided snowmen below. Their joy pierced through the heaviness that had clouded her heart since confronting Arthur. She thought of her father, the man who raised her, how he would have loved a morning like this. He had always believed in simple pleasures, in finding warmth in ordinary moments. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number appeared. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I'd like to see you one more time, on my terms. A." Evelyn stared at the message for a long while, torn between ignoring it and answering. Against her better judgment, she typed back, "Where?" That evening, she found herself outside a modest community center in Harlem. The building was nothing like the Whitmore mansion. No chandeliers, no marble floors, just brick walls, fluorescent lights, and the laughter of children echoing from inside. Arthur was there, standing awkwardly in the entryway. No tailored suit this time, only a wool coat and a scarf. His face looked tired, stripped of the armor of wealth. "I volunteer here now," he said quietly when she approached. "They needed funding, and I needed purpose." He gestured toward the gymnasium, where a group of children were playing basketball. "I thought Empire was built with steel and glass. Turns out it's built with people." Evelyn followed him inside. She watched as Arthur knelt to tie a boy's shoelaces, his large hands clumsy but gentle. She saw the way his face softened when the kids called his name, tugging at his sleeve for attention. It was strange, almost disorienting, to see the man who once embodied power and intimidation now humbled, laughing awkwardly when a little girl handed him a drawing. "You're trying," Evelyn said, her voice low but not unkind. Arthur nodded. "It's late in life for me to change, but maybe not too late to do something right." For the first time, Evelyn felt her anger loosen, if only slightly. She wasn't ready to forgive, not yet, but seeing him stripped of arrogance, offering kindness with nothing to gain, stirred something inside her. They sat on a bench near the basketball court. The noise of bouncing balls and squealing children filled the air. Arthur spoke after a long silence. "I know I failed you. I failed your mother. But I want you to know, I see you now, not just as my blood, but as someone I should have been proud to claim years ago." Evelyn turned away, blinking back tears. "You don't get to rewrite the past, Arthur." "I know," he replied softly. "But maybe I can rewrite the ending." She studied him for a long moment, then stood. "We'll see." Her words hung in the air, not a promise, but not a rejection either. As she walked out into the snowy night, Evelyn realized redemption wasn't a single act or a plea for forgiveness. It was a journey, one she wasn't sure she was willing to share with him yet. But for the first time, she allowed the possibility to exist. Over the next week, Evelyn carried the image of Arthur at the community center like a stone in her pocket, heavy, impossible to ignore. Each time she sat in a meeting or walked past holiday displays in store windows, her mind drifted back to the sight of him kneeling to tie a child's shoes, his once imposing figure softened by humility. It was difficult to reconcile that man with the patriarch who had sat silent while she was mocked. On Friday evening, she attended a charity gala hosted by Harper Dynamics. The ballroom glowed with golden lights and evergreen garlands, the air rich with the scent of pine and cinnamon. Evelyn wore a deep blue gown, her hair swept elegantly back. She moved through the room with quiet confidence, shaking hands with executives, exchanging kind words with staff who admired her recent stand. Jonathan Pierce, the CEO, greeted her warmly. "Evelyn, I'm glad you came. You've become somewhat of an inspiration in this city." She smiled faintly. "I didn't plan it that way." "No one ever does," he replied. "But courage rarely goes unnoticed." And their conversation drifted toward business, but Evelyn found herself distracted. She realized she had changed. She no longer sought the approval of boardrooms or the validation of powerful families. What mattered to her now was integrity and the relationships built on it. After the gala, as she stepped into the snowy streets, She saw a figure waiting near the curb. Arthur. He looked smaller against the swirl of snowflakes, his breath rising in visible clouds. For a moment, Evelyn considered walking past him. But something rooted her in place. "I shouldn't have come here," Arthur said, his voice rough with cold invulnerability. "But I needed to tell you. I've put the last of my holdings into the center. My legacy won't be glass towers or bank accounts. It'll be those kids. I thought you deserved to know." Evelyn studied him, her heart a storm of conflicting emotions. "Why tell me?" "Because even if you never forgive me," he said softly, "you should know I'm trying to be the man I should have been for you." The snow fell harder, settling on his shoulders, turning his hair silver white. Evelyn felt the ache of old wounds and the weight of new possibilities. She wasn't ready to forgive, but she was ready to see him not as a symbol of betrayal, but as a flawed man searching for redemption at the end of his life. She nodded once quietly. "Then keep trying." Arthur's eyes glistened. He opened his mouth to speak, but Evelyn had already turned, her heels crunching against the snow as she walked away. Back in her apartment that night, she curled up in a blanket, the city lights twinkling beyond her window. For the first time since the scandal, she felt peace creep in, not from triumph over the Whitmores, but from letting go of the bitterness that chained her to them. She couldn't change the past, but she could choose the path ahead. And though forgiveness was still far away, Evelyn knew the possibility of healing was no longer shut out. Somewhere on the edge of redemption, father and daughter had taken their first fragile steps toward it. Christmas morning dawned clear and bright over Manhattan. Snow blanketed the streets, muffling the usual chaos of the city. Church bells chimed in the distance, their sound carried on crisp air that smelled faintly of pine and roasted chestnuts from corner vendors. Evelyn stood by her apartment window, watching families hurry along the sidewalks, arms full of wrapped gifts, children tugging at their parents' coats with sparkling eyes. Her own apartment was quiet. A small tree glowed in the corner, strung with simple white lights and a handful of ornaments she had collected over the years. Beneath it sat a single present, wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine, the kind her father used to wrap when she was a child, long before corporate wealth or social scandals colored her life. She thought about calling her mother in Boston, about inviting friends over for brunch. But instead, her mind lingered on Arthur. She had ignored his last few messages, letting silence stretch between them. And yet, beneath her stubbornness, she felt a tug. The memory of him at the community center, smiling awkwardly, tying a child's shoelace, had refused to fade. Just after noon, Evelyn bundled into her coat and stepped into the snowy streets. The cab driver looked surprised when she gave him the address, the community center in Harlem. Inside, the gymnasium buzzed with life. Volunteers in Santa hats handed out gifts, children squealed with delight, and the smell of hot cocoa mingled with peppermint candy canes. Arthur was there, dressed plainly in a sweater and slacks, his hair tousled, a Santa hat perched crookedly on his head. He was handing out basketballs to a group of boys, his booming laugh echoing across the room. When he saw Evelyn at the doorway, the laughter faltered, replaced by a stunned silence. She crossed the room slowly, her boots crunching against the salt scattered on the floor. "Merry Christmas," she said softly. Arthur's throat bobbed as he swallowed. "Merry Christmas, Evelyn." Prayed. For a moment, neither moved. Then one of the children tugged at Arthur's sleeve, oblivious to the tension. "Santa, can she help too?" Evelyn managed a small smile. She crouched beside the boy, handing him a wrapped box from the pile. His grin was wide enough to light the room. Slowly, the ice cracked. Together, father and daughter handed out gifts, their movements tentative at first, then easier, almost natural. Later, when the children had scattered to play with their toys, Evelyn and Arthur sat on a bench near the tree in the corner of the gym. The twinkle lights reflected in her eyes as she finally spoke. "You'll never be the father who raised me. He's the one who gave me everything. But maybe," she paused, searching for the right words, "maybe you can still be someone in my life." Arthur's eyes glistened. "That would be more than I deserve." Then don't waste it," she said, her voice gentle but firm. The hum of laughter and holiday songs filled the space around them. And for the first time, Evelyn felt that the storm had passed. What lay ahead wasn't simple, but it was real, a chance to heal, however imperfectly, and to step into a future shaped not by old wounds, but by new choices. As the afternoon faded into evening, The community center emptied, leaving only a few volunteers cleaning up. Evelyn and Arthur walked out together into the winter dusk. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, the street lamps casting a golden glow on the sidewalk. Arthur hesitated, then offered her his arm. It was a small gesture, almost old-fashioned. For a moment, Evelyn considered brushing it off, but something inside urged her otherwise. She slipped her hand through his arm, and together they walked toward the diner on the corner, its neon sign flickering "Open" in red. Inside, the place was nearly empty. A jukebox in the corner hummed softly with Bing Crosby's White Christmas. They slid into a booth by the window, and the waitress, a kind-faced woman with tired eyes, greeted them with a warm smile. "Coffee for both?" she asked. Arthur chuckled. "Make it 2. And maybe a slice of pie?" "Apple for me," Evelyn added. The waitress winked. "Coming right up." "Oh." They sat in silence for a while, the clink of silverware, and the low murmur of the jukebox filling the space. Finally, Arthur cleared his throat. "I used to come to places like this when I was your age. Back then I thought I had all the time in the world. I wasted most of it chasing things that didn't matter." His eyes lingered on the snow outside. "When I lost your mother, I thought I lost everything. I didn't know I had already lost you too." Evelyn sipped her coffee, letting the warmth spread through her. "You didn't lose me," she said slowly. "You just weren't there, and I can't get those years back. But maybe we can start from here." Arthur looked at her, his expression raw, unguarded. "I don't deserve that chance." "Maybe not," Evelyn admitted, setting down her cup. "But forgiveness isn't about what you deserve. It's about what people choose to give." The waitress returned with pie, setting the plates gently before them. The smell of cinnamon filled the booth, grounding the moment in something simple, something human. Arthur picked up his fork, then set it down again, his hand trembling. "Evelyn, thank you for even sitting here with me tonight. You don't know what it means." She studied him, the lines on his face, the weight he carried, and for the first time, she saw not the powerful man, not the CEO or the absent father, but a man simply asking for a place at the table. After they finished their meal, Arthur insisted on leaving a generous tip, sliding the bill and cash across the table. Evelyn smiled faintly. "Still trying to make up for lost time?" "Every little bit counts," he replied, his voice almost playful. Outside, the city glistened under fresh snow. Evelyn wrapped her scarf tighter as they walked. Arthur paused at the corner, turning to her. "I know it won't be easy, but if you'll let me, I want to be there. For birthdays, for ordinary Tuesdays, for the days when life feels heavy." She nodded slowly, her throat tightening. "That's all I ever wanted. Just presents." Arthur's eyes brimmed with tears he didn't try to hide. "Then I promise no more running. Not from you, not from family." They stood there, surrounded by the hum of the city, and for a heartbeat, the world felt still. Evelyn reached into her bag and pulled out a worn photograph, her as a little girl with her adoptive father, both smiling at a picnic table. She held it out for Arthur to see. "This is who raised me. He taught me what love looks like. If you want to be in my life, follow his example." Arthur touched the photo reverently, as if it were holy. "I will," he whispered. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt the heavy wall around her heart loosen. She slipped the photo back into her bag and started walking. Arthur fell into step beside her. They didn't need to say more. The snow-covered city, the warm glow of lights in apartment windows, and the quiet promise between them were enough. Christmas bells rang out again across Manhattan as father and daughter disappeared into the evening. Not perfect, not easy, but together. And for Evelyn, that was more than enough. The snow had already begun to melt on the sidewalks, leaving behind the glisten of a new day. And in many ways, that mirrored the story we just walked through together. A daughter who had grown strong in the absence of her father, and a man who had nearly lost his soul in the chase for success, found themselves face to face on Christmas morning with a choice that mattered more than wealth or pride. They chose family. Not a perfect family, not one free of scars or regrets, but a real one, built on forgiveness and the willingness to try again. If you're listening tonight and you've lived enough years to know how heavy regret can feel, you'll understand why this story lingers. It's not about riches or contracts, not about who won the argument at the banquet hall or who was humiliated in front of society. It's about the quiet moment when a daughter held out her hand to the man who failed her, and the father finally found the courage to hold on. That is the heart of redemption. The lesson is simple, but it runs deep. Love and forgiveness create homes stronger than any mansion, and kindness offered even when undeserved has the power to change destiny. No matter our age, we are never too late to mend a bond, never too far gone to admit our mistakes, and never too old to start again. Just as a pot of coffee tastes better when shared at the family table, life itself is sweeter when lived not for oneself, but for the people who call us their own. Think of your own life for a moment. The Sunday dinners when laughter filled the room, the holiday mornings when children tore into gifts, the porch lights waiting for loved ones to come home. Those memories remind us that happiness rarely arrives in grand gestures. It hides in the ordinary acts of care, in being present for one another. Like a steady lamp glowing in a farmhouse window, a simple act of compassion can guide us through even the darkest roads. And so, as this story closes, let it echo as a quiet invitation. Take a breath, look around at the people still beside you, and ask yourself if there's a phone call you've been putting off, an apology you've been carrying but never spoken, or a child or parent waiting for you to show up. Because, in the end, the wealth we leave behind will not be counted in dollars, but in the faces that smile when we walk through the door. If this story touched you, leave a 1 in the comments below. If it didn't, or if you'd like to share your thoughts on how it could speak more deeply, type 0. Your voice matters here, because these stories are not just mine to tell, they belong to all of us who believe in second chances and the strength of family.